Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for another record collection update video. January 2025, first of the new year. It's finally here, so let's talk about what we got down here. Now, I said in my last video that I was not really intending on getting a whole lot of records around this time of year because it is the Christmas season and that sort of thing. And judging by the pile that I have down towards my right here, that did not turn out, that did not pan out the way that I intended entirely. So, nevertheless, we persist. And I have a stack of records that I've acquired. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about them. I really am going to try to be mindful of time this time around because these collection videos consistently go for very long periods of time where I talk enthusiastically about these records for what feels like hours on end. And so, because of that, I'm just going to try to get right into it and stop lollygagging. So, and I didn't really take a look at these records super closely, so I've kind of forgotten what all's in here to some degree. I will say stick around towards the end, though. The final thing that I have to show you here is going to be a teaser for what the next discography deep dive is going to be on this channel, the next discography ranking. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so I think a lot of the first set of records here come from Electric Fetus, the major record store in downtown Minneapolis. They were doing a blowout sale in around early to mid-November, give or take. And they were getting rid of a lot of their new LPs, records that had kind of been sitting on their shelves, and they were doing it at discount prices, like 50% off, 60% off, 70% off, and stuff like that. So I took advantage of that to get quite a few of these new records on vinyl. A lot of these records that I had heard good things about, but haven't actually listened to yet, or at least hadn't actually listened to at that time. So I don't have a whole lot to say about some of these because I haven't heard it. Haven't heard the records yet, but they've intrigued me. I've heard good things about the artist, and so I figured it would be a worthwhile blind buy, as it were. So we're going to start with an artist who I do know and do enjoy quite a bit. I've just never gotten around to hearing this record, and that's The Age of Pleasure by Janelle Monáe. This is her fourth studio record. This came out, what was it, last year, I think? Or 2023 now, so 2 years ago. Yeah, I have really liked Janelle Monáe for quite a while. I love the first kind of few records that she did. I think she's such an interesting and talented musician, artistic mind, and actress as well. Does a lot of great kind of acting work outside of everything else. The most recent record of hers that I've heard is Dirty Computer, which is not my absolute favorite. I would say her debut full-length project is probably my favorite, but I do think Dirty Computer was still a really strong album. And I've heard good things about The Age of Pleasure. Again, not necessarily career highlight feedback or reviews, but enough to intrigue me a lot. So I'm very excited to get that. Also, again, the alternative cover, which I think was released at least at certain record stores, or it was like the vinyl has one cover, the CD is another cover type of thing. Either way, really cool to own it. Okay, this record I have heard, but although it's been quite a while, and this is another artist I do plan on doing a discography dive of sometime in the discography ranking, because there's not too many of her out there. I think there's only one other discography ranking of her that I've seen out there, and that's Tori Amos, Ocean to Ocean. Good album. My late career Tori familiarity is not super great in the sense that I've heard all of her albums. I've gone through her entire discography before, but once you get to like around The Beekeeper probably is where I kind of lost steam a little bit and lost interest. And from then on, I think a lot of the records I inputted in my brain as being good, but not necessarily remarkable. This is her most recent full-length project from 2021, and I remember it being one of the better ones for sure, but not necessarily one that I am, again, intimately familiar with. And that's part of why I do want to review the Tori discography, because certainly I think the first like half dozen or so records that she put out are, or for the most part, with the possible exception of that one covers record she did, across the board, just like phenomenal, great stuff. And I've talked about Little Earthquakes on this channel before being one of my favorite records of all time. So don't be surprised if that hits number one whenever we do that ranking. But really cool to have Ocean to Ocean. All right, we have Geddy Lee next with My Favorite Headache. This came out on vinyl. I don't think technically for the first time. I think it was put out before. This came out last summer. And this is the one solo record of Geddy's that he ever put out. He talks about it in his autobiography, which I have read. I haven't really talked about it on this channel. I didn't do a proper review of it. I kind of just inserted it into my reading agenda in the middle of sometime last year, early last year, and I ended up reading it in like a day. Phenomenal autobiography, by the way, like the best rock autobiography I've ever read, and that includes Bruce Springsteen's, which I also think is phenomenal. And he talks about how this record was ultimately the product of coping with the band Rush kind of being broken up at that point. Neil Peart was on effectively an indefinite leave of absence due to the deaths of his wife and daughter. And so My Favorite Headache was kind of the coping mechanism for Geddy during this time. Now, I'm going to be very frank with you. I've only heard a couple songs off the actual record, even though I'm a huge Rush fan. Rush, another band that will be getting a discography ranking at some point. I've not actually heard either of the solo projects by Geddy or by Alex Lifeson. But seeing that both those records were released on vinyl this year, of course, I had to pick them up to try to get as close to completing the Rush collection as I reasonably can. So very excited to listen to those. This record I have heard a lot more recently. Lucy Dacus, Historian. This, I talked about Lucy in one of the other recent videos because I got Home Video on LP by her. And I think Home Video is great. A great record overall. Really like the vibe of it. But Historian to me is the standout Lucy Dacus project and is a contender for my favorite Boy Genius or Boy Genius adjacent project. It would be pretty tight between like this and Punisher probably. I think she's a really interesting songwriter. I love her kind of matter-of-fact, sort of sardonic lyrical style. It's never like too overblown. It's not too drawn out, but it's still really interesting. I like her voice a lot. I think the instrumental direction that she goes on this record builds off of what she had been doing in her previous work. And yeah, just really compelling, interesting songwriting. One of the best singer-songwriter records of the last 5-10 years or so. Really happy to have that on vinyl. I had been looking for that for ages, not exaggerating. Okay. This is another blind buy. I don't remember who I was hearing good things about this from. Could have been a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine on a Discord server that I'm a part of. I think Spectrum Pulse, Mark Grondin from Spectrum Pulse may have also talked this record up. This is Emily Scott Robinson with American Siren. Yeah, heard really good things about this as a solid country record, and have heard good things about her as an artist. Recorded in Nashville, North Carolina. This is from a few years ago, so this is not a brand new LP, brand new release. But I really have been finding myself just fully immersing myself in country music textures a lot more. I've always enjoyed country music. I've always had some level of appreciation for it, but especially within the last year or so, I think I've just been really opening my mind to a lot of these kind of textures, these rootsier ideas, which you can probably hear my appreciation of in the Joan Baez ranking video that I just put out a few days ago as I'm recording this. So really excited to check this out, see what comes of it. Only $9 too. I mean, cheap as hell for a completely brand new record. Wow. Another blind buy, although I have heard a record of this person's before. This is Anais Mitchell with her self-titled record. This is her most recent studio project. She So I'm familiar with her work on a couple of different levels. I'm mostly familiar with her work with Big Red Machine on their most recent record, How Long Do You Think It's Gonna Last? She cameos on like 3 songs on there, I think. And I think she fits in really well. And she and Justin Vernon have worked together before because Vernon appeared on the record Hadestown that she did, which is easily, I think, the most famous work she's ever done. Now, I have heard Hadestown, and it's been a while, it's been a few years, but I remember it being really compelling and just a really interesting idea. And since I've heard it, of course, it's become a whole like Broadway musical and things like that. It's become a big deal. I mean, I see the soundtrack record for Hadestown now more than I do the original studio album. So, yeah, really like her voice, really interesting singer. And I think her musical ideas and her kind of contributions to the songs that I've heard and the one record that I've heard are really cool. So I'm excited to check this one out. I have a couple friends who are big fans of hers. So excited to hear more from her. And another blind buy from an artist who I don't really know that much about. This is Julie Byrne with The Greater Wings. This is another folk record. She's put out a couple of albums that have kind of been on my radar off and on. She put out another one a couple years before this that I've heard good things about as well. Again, it's a blind buy. Haven't heard it yet. But for $10, I think it was an interesting pick. And again, I've heard consistently good things. Maybe not necessarily rave reviews to the point of it being like one of the best folk albums of the last few years or anything like that, but enough to where I felt like I could take a chance on it and, get a decent return. So really excited to check it out. All right, so we're going to start segueing into talking about records that I know a little bit better. Buck Owens. We have, what's the full title? Buck Owens, Ruby, and Other Bluegrass Specials. I say I'm going to talk about records that I know better, and then I forget the title of this one. I've known of Buck Owens for a while. He's had 1 or 2 other records that I've talked about that I have in my collection. But the biggest revelation for me in appreciating Buck Owens as a musician and as a performer was, of course, the podcast Cocaine and Rhinestones. Of course, I did a review on the book adaptation of season 2 of that podcast. And, in season 1, Tyler Mahan Co. does a 2-part series, 2 episodes on Buck Owens, and the and the Buckaroos and Don Rich, and kind of the relationship between Buck Owens and Don Rich. And one of the records that he highlights in, I think, the 2nd episode is this one, because this is Buck Owens and his group doing bluegrass music. And if you know their sound, you know that Buck Owens traditionally is going to be Bakersfield. It's a little bit more geared towards, electric textures and things like that. It's a lot more modern, and bluegrass is kind of, a very left field. It's a very, complete opposite side of the country type of thing. So this is a kind of a novelty record in that sense, but it's really well done. And that's because of the fact that the Buckaroos, his backing band, were so excellent in what they did. Great players. Don Rich, one of the most underrated, underappreciated country musicians probably ever, ultimately. Just the glue of the entire band. Great guitar playing, great fiddle work on this record. And the vocal performances, not just by Buck as a soloist, but the harmony singing on songs like the title track, just stellar stuff. Really cool pickup, really happy to have it. Riley Walker, Primrose Green. Chances are, even if you've never heard a Riley Walker record, you've probably seen this guy on social media. He has, or at least had, a very, very active Twitter presence, making maybe one of the best kind of music posters on Twitter, if I'm being honest. This is the only record of his that I know. He's put out a bunch of albums over the years. But this is the one that I heard the most about because a YouTuber that I used to follow a little bit had it rated as one of his best records of 2015, I think it was. And yeah, great folk album. I really like the songs on here. I really like the aesthetic. And it all also feels very it's homespun, I suppose, in an endearing way. Part of that is because the record was recorded over a short period of time. So you definitely get the sense that there is like an energy to the songs, or like a vitality to the songs that I think comes from the immediacy of its creation, I suppose. But I really like tracks like the title track, Summer Dress, Hide in the Roses, and tracks like that. Yeah, really, really great album. I definitely think one of my favorite folk records from that era, like the mid 2010s, and maybe even the 2010s overall. And I've not checked out his other records. I don't think I've heard another one of his albums in full. So I look forward to doing that at some point. MJ Lenderman, Manning Fireworks. Yep, had to do it. Another great record from the year of our Lord 2024. Now, I'm going to be revisiting the records that I heard in 2024. I've actually been kind of diving into that a lot more lately. And my goal is to ultimately have a very, very belated top albums of 2024 video that comes out on this channel. Who knows when that's going to happen? I have a list of like 80 records that I want to either hear or re-listen to. So not entirely sure when that's going to happen, but I can tell you for damn sure that Manning Fireworks is going to be very high on this list. This is one of the best indie rock records that I've heard in the last several years. I've been sleeping on MJ Lenderman, man. I've heard good things about him for years. I've heard his name kind of through the grapevine, but it wasn't until I heard the Waxahachie single from early last year, Right Back to It, which features Lenderman on backing vocals. It wasn't until then that I was like really drawn to it, because I adore that song. It's one of my favorite songs of 2024. And so when this project came out and everyone was raving about it as being like album of the year, or everyone except Anthony Fantano was anyways, I had to check it out. And I actually listened to it driving to listen to see the Bob Dylan, to see the Outlaw Festival tour in Wisconsin. So I heard this record on the drive over, and it was really, really great. Really great album. Again, I'm not going to get too into the details about what I love about it, but I will say people quote Wristwatch all over the place, and that was my favorite song from the start of this project. Just clever lyrics, great tune, great playing. Yeah, MJ Lenderman, really awesome. Definitely one of my favorite records of 2024. Okay, next we have Gregory Alan Isakov with That Sea the Gambler. This is, he's another one I've known about for a while. Friends of mine are pretty into his music, listen to him a lot. I have a lot of memories of hearing his songs in like late night car rides and things like that. And I don't know if this is my favorite record of his necessarily, because I really have to like sit and listen to his discography properly rather than kind of scattered pieces of several albums throughout years of my life. But I did eventually sit down and listen to this record front to back, and I think it's really, really good. Yeah, just a really clever and well done folk album overall. I really like tracks like San Francisco, John Brown's Body, the title track, Raising Cain, The Moon Was Red and Dangerous. Bunch of just really great stuff on this record. So, as far as like folk artists, folk singer-songwriters go, yeah, really solid. No complaints there. All right. So next, I am continuing my mission, as it were, of collecting everything I can find related to Justin Vernon, related to Bon Iver, including very adjacent projects to him, projects that where he's kind of involved peripherally. He's not a featured artist necessarily, and that includes this. Gangs Related. This is a collective of artists that was formed in Minneapolis. It was the brainchild of a guy named Ryan Olson, who operated a record label and a recording studio in downtown Minneapolis for a number of years. Still might at this point. I don't really know much about him in general, but the biggest thing I know is that he is a credited producer on Lizzo's first record, which she was independently released on his record label. So that's pretty cool, I guess. But this is a collective of different artists. So you have people like Olson's on here, Justin Vernon's on here. So too are the other members of DeArmond Edison, the Cook brothers. You have various other kind of figures in the Twin Cities music scene, like Harmar Superstar is on here somewhere. I haven't heard it in a long time, and not to spoil what the announcement's going to be at the end of the video, but I'm going to be revisiting this record soon enough, so I'll have more detailed thoughts to come on it. But what I do remember of it from hearing it a number of years ago is that it is a very, it's very indebted to the 80s. It's a lot of like indie rock, folk, country, Americana musicians doing a lot of songs that give you strong kind of hardcore 80s vibes, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting fusion, and I think it works pretty well. Not one of my favorite Vernon adjacent projects necessarily, but it's pretty cool. So I'm happy to have it. Bob Dylan time. And you can actually see on this label here kind of where I bought the records from. A lot of these ones that I've been showing here are from Revival Records in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, when I was in Eau Claire for a bit of time over the late fall. Really cool place. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't. But in any case, this is Bob Dylan, Shadows in the Night. First of the three Sinatra tribute records, the Standards records. And my favorite of the three, I think. I just think the mood on this album compared to Fallen Angels and Triplicate is a little bit more consistent. And I think it plays a little bit more to the strengths of not even just Dylan as a vocalist, because I don't know if you could truthfully say that any of these records play to Dylan's strengths as a vocalist. But I think it plays to the strengths of how he wants to represent these songs and how he wants to present himself as kind of an interpreter of these songs. Really nice arrangements, really beautiful arrangements, honestly, like just perfect stuff. And Dylan himself, again, your mileage may vary as far as how well his voice works on these projects for you, but I tend to think that it works pretty damn well. I've grown accustomed to it. And so Shadows in the Night, yeah, really cool to own that one. Really happy to have it. Now this one, so I got another Dylan record while I was there, which is not one I ever really expected to find in the wild. This is the hardest Bob Dylan studio record to find on vinyl, as far as I'm aware. In fact, I know that's true because I have looked at used LP prices for a lot of these things. There is no Dylan record that is harder to find than this one. That is Together Through Life from 2009. Now, don't get me wrong, what I said in the Dylan ranking video is still true, where I think this is one of the harder Dylan records for me to talk about because I think it is one of his most average works. I think that it's a good album, but ultimately it doesn't do a whole lot that other records immediately before this or even immediately afterwards don't do a little bit better. But nevertheless, again, this is the collector part of me here, where I like this era of Dylan in general, this kind of 2000s era. And even if I think this is kind of like trying to imitate modern times a little bit and doing that style just a little bit with slightly less interesting songs for my taste personally, I also think it's still a nice aesthetic. And I think with how his voice is kind of shifting becoming more gravelly around this time and darker. You're prefacing what he's going to sound like on Tempest, and Tempest is one of my favorite late career Dylan records. So, in that sense, I guess it has its value. But more so, just I found that record for, I think it was like, what was it? Yeah, $50 used. And this is a record that could absolutely set you back 3 digits if you buy it online. The reason that it was a little bit lower, I think, is because technically it was not sealed and the CD is missing. I don't really give a shit about the CD because I already own it on CD, so that's fine. But cool to own that. All right. Okay, this one. So, I got this also at Revival Records in Eau Claire. And this is not the best Rush album by any means. It's one of the weaker ones in a lot of people's eyes. It's maybe mid-pack for me if I had to rank it, because I kind of have a soft spot for it. But this is a bootleg copy of it. This is not an authentic copy, because the authentic copy will set you back $200-something easily. If you try to buy it used, because it was only repressed one time on like 200-gram vinyl. I mean, it's impossible to find. So until they officially repress this one day, and fingers crossed that they will, this is the best I've got. Rush's Test for Echo on a bootleg vinyl, which I got again at the same record store for $50, and you can even see the little boot sticker there. A little boot sticker indicating that it's a bootleg, just so you know you're not buying something authentic. I also got, there was a copy of Clockwork Angels at that same record store that also had a boot sticker. I already own an authentic pressing of Clockwork Angels on vinyl, so I didn't have to do that. But they did have 2 copies of this Test for Echo, and my buddy Jack, who he and I make jokes about this record all the time, he really wanted the second copy of it, so I literally went back to this record store the next day before I left Eau Claire and got him that second copy. So you're welcome, Jack. This is the last record that they put out before the personal tragedies with Neil Peart caused the band to go on hiatus for a few years. And it's not a great bit of songwriting, this record. But man, I think it sounds cool. Like this album rocks pretty fucking hard with songs like the title track, Driven, Time and Motion. Virtuality has just a fucking killer hook. If it wasn't for the fact that like Peart's lyrics on this record are the most like some of the most kind of inane stuff that he ever wrote, some of the stuff that just seems like kind of middle-aged dad jokes almost at times, like Virtuality, as I said, kick-ass guitar riff, but then you mix that with these like very these lyrics about the internet that are very have they aged poorly? I don't know, because I don't know if you could describe how they've aged. They just seem kind of derpy in general. But in any case, I think it's a good album. I think it's a really good album, actually. It just kind of has a reputation for not being one of their stronger ones, and being kind of the last stage of Rush in kind of this 90s era where people still, I don't think, are fully convinced that they were quote unquote back. And then, of course, they have that kind of final career stage after Peart's return and the hiatus and all that, before the band did finally break up. I should say, too, again, this is a bootleg copy. This is basically just an enlarged CD print on the cover, so it's a little bit out of focus. That's kind of the only thing you can tell. And although I haven't spun it yet, I have been told by the cashier at Revival Records when I bought it, that it is, in fact, that it sounds just as good as an authentic copy. So, who knows? But really cool to have it. All right. Typhoon, Sympathetic Magic. I talked about Typhoon a little bit in my last video, in my last record collection video, I believe, band from the Portland area. And I've said before that White Lighter is probably my favorite Typhoon record, because I think it's one of the most just interesting, kind of out of left field, weird time signatures, just eccentric indie rock records I've heard in a bit. Certainly one of the most eccentric ones from when around the time it was released, 2013. This one is really good too. This one might be my second favorite. This came out in 2021, I believe. Was made during COVID. And you still have that kind of eccentricity to it, but you also have a lot of other like kind of softer textures. It's a little bit calmer. It doesn't feel like it has as much to prove as something like White Lighter does. And then it also has one of the softest songs they've ever done, at least for a lot of its runtime, the song Motion and Thought, which is one of my favorite Typhoon songs. I've been listening to that a lot this winter. Really great stuff. Really happy to have it. All right, cruising along. Kit Sebastian with Melody. I've not heard this record yet, but Kit Sebastian featured in one of my previous videos with their record New International, which is also one of my favorite records of 2024. So I saw this on a discount, at a discount at a cheapo records down out here, and I was like, yeah, I mean, sure, I'll take a chance on their second album, because I'm sure if their third album was one of the best records I've heard in 2024, then this one's probably not too bad either. Yeah, just really such an interesting band. And again, I'll talk more about New International when we eventually do the 2024 retrospective and whenever that comes out. But again, that mixture of textures of like non-Western, non-kind of Anglophone music styles with these very like retro, like almost disco, funk, classic rock inspired song ideas. It's really damn cool. And it's so well played. It's so well done. It's so fucking cool. So I'm really excited to check that one out eventually. Okay. We're going to get some prog action going next. Lark's Tongues and Aspic by King Crimson. My first King Crimson record on vinyl, which is really awesome. Crimson have been a band. I don't know their full catalog. I've heard the heavy hitters. I've heard their first like 7 or 8 or whatever it is. And I don't know this. I would say as far as my favorite Crimson record goes, it might be this one. It could be Red, or it could be the debut. It's really hard to say. But I think overall, as a kind of like, if I had to say what my favorite lineup of Crimson is, it's probably not surprising, but the lineup that is focused for the most part on Fripp, John Wetton, and Bill Bruford. That kind of core foundation, which of course ends up becoming pretty much all of Red, they're still present on Lark's Tongues and Aspic, and I think that's my favorite lineup. All three of them sensational individual players. But yeah, really like the textures, really like the playing on this record. I think maybe the most consistent Crimson album, either like sonically or just from like a songwriting quality standpoint, front to back. Really phenomenal stuff. Crimson will get their time on this channel. I will be going into some of the English prog bands at some point. That might even become like a whole series or something that I do down the line. Who knows? All right, we got some other cool ones coming up. Speaking of Justin Vernon, here is Volcano Choir, Repave. The second of the 2 Volcano Choir records. If you're not familiar with Volcano Choir, it is a collaboration between Justin Vernon and the members of Collections of Colonies of Bees, who are a Wisconsin kind of indie rock outfit. I'm not familiar with their work outside of this context, but Volcano Choir put out 2 records around the same time that like Bon Iver had just kind of emerged into the mainstream. This is the second of the 2. They disbanded after this record, or they've been kind of on indefinite hiatus ever since. And when I first heard these LPs, this was easily my favorite. The other one is a little bit more kind of experimental and formless, avant-garde. It's kind of the same thing with like Big Red Machine, where the first Big Red Machine record is kind of like all over the place and doesn't deal with as many traditional song structures, but the second record is a little bit more kind of tight and a little bit more traditional in that sense. And even though I love the eccentric stuff, I still find myself vibing with the second record a lot more than the first. And that's true with Big Red Machine, and that's true here too. This, out of all the Bon Iver adjacent studio projects, this is probably the one that sounds the closest to an actual Bon Iver record. That's all I'm going to say for now. But I will say that it's really good. It's a really great album, and if you're looking to check out anything that Vernon's done outside of Bon Iver, if you're a fan of records like the self-titled Bon Iver record, I think Repave is going to be in pretty easy first choice. All right. Next up, we've got kind of a holy grail pick. That might be, a bit of an exaggeration, but this is an album I've wanted for a long time, long time. But you'll never find it out in the wild because this thing is only been pressed a couple of times on vinyl and like hardly at all since like the 70s. I think this pressing is from, it says copyright 1967. It might be a repressing from the early 70s. I don't exactly remember. John Fahey, Volume 2, Death, Chants, Breakdowns, and Military Waltzes. There was a period of time when I did kind of a dive into records from the 50s and onward. It was going to be just this like huge comprehensive deep dive type of thing, and then I kind of burned out in the mid to late 60s. So I never ended up coming close to finishing it. But my core memory is listening to this record because it was a highly rated album on Rate Your Music. And John Fahey, for those who don't know, American kind of guitarist, folk musician, known for his work with like solo acoustic guitar recordings. That is his bread and butter. These are guitar, just him and guitar. And I remember hearing this album specifically. I don't even think this was the first Fahey record I heard. I think it might have even been the second. But I remember this album specifically with songs like, the sides of the record I think are flipped on this version, but that opening stretch of songs, Sunflower River Blues, When the Springtime Comes Again, and especially Stomping Tonight on the Pennsylvania-Alabama Border. That 3-song stretch, and especially that third one that I mentioned, was like, holy cow, what, how is this amount of sound, how is this amount of depth, how is this feeling coming out of just one guy playing an acoustic guitar? And not even singing. You don't even need to put words to this music to describe it. Like you feel, darkness, you feel peace, you feel light, you feel so many emotions, and it just comes in how he is picking that damn guitar. And it's stellar. It's so compelling, and the whole record is. And this sets the stage for what will become a very prolific career, ultimately, in the genre. Like I said, a ton of great albums to his name. This is also not the original cover. Weird shade of orange. I guess cool to have more orange vinyl, but or orange record covers, I should say. But the original cover is not like this. It's just like a plain white cover with like black text saying the album's title. Very minimalist, but oh so expressive. It's such an expressive record. If you haven't checked out any of his stuff, there's not really a super bad place to start. Check out any of his like 60s records and you won't go away unhappy. But holy cow, that one in particular is just so good. All right. This one I kind of don't want to take completely out of the packaging that it's in. We'll kind of do our best here. This is my first. So we talked about King Crimson. Now let's talk about King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This is Petrodragonic Apocalypse, or Dawn of Eternal Night and Annihilation of Planet Earth and the Beginning of Merciless Damnation. This is like the kind of slipcase that the record comes in. Gotta be able to take this damn thing out somehow. But again, I don't want to rip it. There's got to be a much easier way to do this, and I'm making it seem like whatever. It's okay. We're not very coordinated. I'm sure you can Google what the general album cover looks like. It's this like little dragon thing that looks really cool, but also kind of cute at the same time. I am by no means a King Gizzard expert. Not by a long shot. I've only heard a few of their records, and that's because a friend of mine, who I've gotten to know better within the last year or so, he has gotten really into the Giz, as it were, and he's heard most, if not all, of their studio albums. And this was the first record that he played me. This is the first record that I heard start to finish, and just so entertaining. And again, they don't really sound the same record to record. They have styles that they come back to. Like, this is a more metal adjacent record. It's not the first time that they played with that sound. They've done a lot of psych rock stuff, of course, but yeah, it just really, really great playing. I love that, you know, even though they put out a metric ton of music, they put out so much music from year to year. And people make jokes about it and people meme about it because, oh, you know, it's this, you know, they're just drowning the market, as it were. I don't feel like, from the music that I've heard, that they ever sacrifice quality very much. It always feels inspired. It always feels well performed, well crafted, and intentional. And it just feels like earnest musical ideas. And I think that's really fucking cool. So I think the song was the Gila Monster song, or whatever it's called. That one's a lot of fun. I dig that one quite a bit. Yeah, definitely a highlight on that record for me. Really cool stuff. Happy to own it. And as I said, that's one of their more recent records. It just came out a couple years ago, I think. So to go to the exact opposite of that, Nick Drake, 5 Leaves Left. Nick Drake, another one who will be getting a discography dive pretty soon. In fact, depending on how everything times out, he might even be the next one, frankly. I have some notes already ready to go for his, and it's only 3 albums, so it's pretty straightforward. What a talent. I mean, everybody knows this. I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel or enlightening anybody by saying that he was amazing. But, you know, I had always been kind of a Pink Moon stan, and then the other 2 records were kind of like a notch below it for me. And to an extent, that's still true because I have more of a connection to Pink Moon than the other 2 records, just emotionally. But 5 Leaves Left has emerged a lot more. There was a time when this was my least favorite, and I probably would have preferred Brighter Later to this. Now, no contest. Like, I think each record is kind of solidly in its own tier. Pink Moon at the top, 5 Leaves Left right below it, Brighter Later right below that. They're all phenomenal. It's splitting hairs still, but I just love the mixture of intimacy here, with the kind of additional like string arrangements and things, the additional piano and bass that accompanies some of these songs. I think that mixture of ideas works really well, and it doesn't get to the point where it's as maximalist as what Brighter Later will become, because Brighter Later is a very, there's a lot more going on with that record. It's a lot more brazenly jazzy. The song Riverman in particular, which everyone talks about as being like one of Nick Drake's signature songs, and they're correct. It's as good as people talked about, and I have no idea why I've, relatively speaking, slept on it for as long as I have. It's great. 5 Leaves Left, stellar album, and I'll be talking more about it for sure in a video not too long from now. Okay, we have I think this is technically just called Victor. The project is called Victor and the album is called Victor. But this is the solo album by Alex Lifeson from Rush. The only one that he has ever put out. I knew from songs that I'd sampled, because I've sampled songs from this one and the Getty one. I knew that the Getty one was going to be a little bit more to my tastes, which is why I got that one earlier on. But I eventually realized I really wanted to make sure that I got this on vinyl while it was still out. Because again, knowing how Rush press records and stuff like that, you know, they might do one press run and then you don't hear anything about the record getting put on vinyl ever again. So I wanted to make sure that I got it while it was around before it jumped to like ridiculous prices. Again, I've not heard it yet, so I'm excited to eventually dive in. And whenever I do a Rush ranking, I'm probably not going to include the solo records in a ranking, obviously, but I will want to talk about them. Because they definitely get thrown to the side. I think in general, solo albums can very easily get cast aside when we were talking about a band and when we were talking about a group. And as we start talking more about bands and groups as part of this channel. Like for instance, I have an idea of what I want the next band discography dive to be. I am going to be making a point of talking about solo records in the context either of those videos, or potentially just doing a separate video where I rank the solo albums by those artists in general. I haven't done it for any of the bands that I've covered so far. A lot of them it doesn't really apply super neatly. But for something like the Beatles, for instance, eventually there will be videos on probably each of the members' solo records, since each of their catalogs are sufficient enough and sizable enough to warrant individual videos rather than all of them thrown together. But for some of the other bands that I have in mind in the near future, they will probably get a video where I just kind of rank all the members' solo albums together. So that'll be coming down the line in 2025. So you're welcome. But let's talk about a phenomenal jazz album now. Pharoah Sanders' Karma. I think technically one of the first jazz records I ever really heard and was really aware of. And I don't really know why. I think as a kid, I randomly did kind of a deep dive into 1969, where I just read a lot about albums that came out that year. And this was one of the highest rated, most acclaimed records that came out that year. One of the highest rated on Rate Your Music, on allmusic.com, that sort of thing. And so eventually I checked it out. And if you're not aware about who Pharoah Sanders is, first off, what are you doing? I mean, I'm not an expert. I've only heard this and then the Floating Points collaboration that he did before he died. But one of the best spiritual jazz artists and one of the best saxophonists of his era, just in general. The creator has a master plan, which takes up, I think, the entire first side of this LP. Is one of, I mean, it's an achievement to me on the level of something like A Love Supreme. And I'm not going to say that's where it's pulling from, because I don't know how much there's like that direct influence without having read the story of the record. But I think it pulls from a lot of similar spiritual ideas. There's a lot of, again, heavy like freeform saxophone playing. There's a lot of like chanting and stuff like that. And yeah, it's remarkable and it's compelling and it leaves me enthralled for the entire 20-ish minutes or however long it is. Really, really just phenomenal stuff. And the fun part about this is that this is a high quality repressing. This is from the Acoustic Sound series. So this is apparently an audiophile vinyl reissue, which is very exciting. We'll have to test that at some point to figure out how true that is. Okay, switch the order up a little bit. So I made a Target trip a few weeks back, I should say. Ironically, not ironically, I think I did this like around the time I saw Wicked in theaters, which is really good, by the way. If you haven't seen, I think I did a review on Instagram about Wicked. Really good film, really highly recommend it. But I went to Target because they had just dropped a couple of LPs that I wanted to pick up by two artists, two bands, one band, one artist that have had a lot of impact on me. And you can probably guess who they are if you've watched any of my other videos about artists and albums and stuff like that have made an impact on me. So first off, we have Meet the Beatles. This is the limited edition Target repressing on the blue vinyl, I think. Yeah, opaque blue vinyl. 60th anniversary repressing. I already own a copy of Meet the Beatles. It was a very kind of beat up copy that I found used someplace for like $6-7 or something. So I don't know exactly how playable that is. I can't imagine it's all that playable. So I might end up using this as kind of a plain copy as long as the pressing is good enough. But yeah, I mean, what can you say? It's the first US LP. It's where a ton of Americans discovered the Beatles in general and discovered their back catalog. And it's terrific. I mean, as an album, as a collection of songs, it ranks right up there with the very best of the Parlophone records from 63, 64, 65. Like if you included this on a Beatles ranking, it would probably be like top half for me, kind of around or even above like A Hard Day's Night and Help and that sort of thing. So it's a piece of history. It's really cool that they've reissued it. It's really cool that they've reissued a lot of the American Beatles LPs. I don't think I'm going to buy all of them the new versions. I do eventually want to collect them all, but I think I would like to focus on collecting original copies used as much as possible, since those usually don't go for crazy money, even if they're not in the best condition. So I'm happy to own this. And I'm also happy to own this. I've been waiting for this to come out on vinyl for ages, and people are going to roll their eyes. But again, I've talked about being a fan of hers for a long time. And when this record came out in April last year, I was like, they have to put the anthology on vinyl at some point. They have to put the anthology on vinyl. And they did. So Taylor Swift, The Tortured Poets Department, the anthology version on vinyl. Now, I will say I misread or misinterpreted the press release initially. Initially, I thought that they were only going to put out the anthology version as a separate LP, and that was going to be kind of the limited edition component of this release. So that's why eventually I got the main copy of it on vinyl, just the standard copy of it. I finally gave in and bought that. Well, it turns out I misinterpreted it. They actually put out the full thing, the full 4 LP kit and caboodle here on vinyl. So the full regular album and then the anthology version on top of that. As well as like an entire side of just like demos and stuff like that for good measure. So this is a lot. It's a lot of money. But I'm happy to say I did buy it day of. Just in case. I didn't know what the demand was going to be. I didn't know what the supply was going to be. Thankfully, somehow, even though it was released on Black Friday and I bought it on Black Friday, I think I got to the Target at like 8 a.m. or something like that. Trying to kind of beat the lines, but not be super crazy early. And it took me a while to find it because it wasn't with the other records. It was in its own separate stand, but there were tons of them left. Like, they were not sold out by any means. So thank you to the local Target for keeping your supplies stocked. But yeah, had to have the anthology version. I think a lot of the best tracks on the record are on the anthology version. It's the one where Aaron Dessner is the most involved, so of course, that makes me happy. All right, we are kind of closing down, getting towards the end here. This one was just kind of a random find. I have technically heard this, although it's been a while. This is an EP by Waxahachie, Great Thunder, which came out 6-7 years ago, I want to say. Was it 2019? 2018. It's a good EP for sure. I still think the leap from this, because I think this was her last project before St. Cloud. I think the leap between this and St. Cloud is still pretty massive. But it's still really good because Katie Crutchfield is a really great songwriter. And I got this at Down in the Valley Records up in Maple Grove. And this is kind of a limited edition pressing that is limited just to Down in the Valley record stores. So I figured, why the hell not? Why not support a more local chain and get a limited edition copy of this EP for not a bad price? I already talked in length about this record in my discography ranking of this fellow. So I'm not going to talk too much about it right now, but this is going to be a contender for my favorite album of 2024, certainly. Father John Misty, Mahash Mashana. Great. Terrific album. It's the first Father John Misty record that I own on vinyl. And I certainly, after revisiting his catalog, I'm certainly going to be trying to get the whole kit and caboodle on vinyl at this point. But yeah, this is my favorite of his. It just feels like a culmination of so much of what he's done. It feels like an expression of so much. And it's such a massive record while also lacking the hubris that I think can occasionally hurt records like Pure Comedy. There's a lot of ambition, but there's a lot of self-reflection in here. And the playing, the singing, the sounds, the sonics of the record are so immaculate, so well done. One of my favorite albums of the year, for sure. And this is a record that might sneak its way onto the list for sure. I have always been partial to this artist, and I even got to see her live in 2019. I think it was, early 2019 at First Avenue. Aurora, What Happened to the Heart? I really like Aurora. I really like her. Again, I got into her not from myself, I'd heard of her a little bit, but a couple of my friends were really into her music. And so we ended up going to First Avenue on a whim to see her, pretty much, because she happened to be in town at around that time. And, to some extent, I've seen people be a little bit critical of her music in the sense of like, oh, it's clearly borrowing from a lot of like art pop artists who maybe had more to say or who were a little bit more daring than she has been historically. Like people saying, oh, we have Kate Bush at home. Oh, we have Björk at home, what have you. And she definitely pulls very heavily from both of them, especially Björk, I think. But for the most part, I think her projects have been really strong. Her earlier stuff may be a little bit more precocious than anything else because she was so young during that time in her late teens. But now this record, to me, I think is the best thing she's done yet. I think there's an ambition to this. It's kind of a conceptual album about climate change and that sort of thing, and about keeping the earth healthy. When she talks about the heart here, the heart is referring to the planet, basically. And you combine this with her music clearly tangibly maturing in a few different ways. Her voice, like she's not trying to sing in quite the same way that she used to. She's exploring her lower register a little bit more. I think the production is also kind of matured a little bit. So you have more sensitive material here, but you have moments that are still very grandiose and big and sweeping. And it just feels like she's grown into herself a lot more. And I think that's really cool. And I really like the artwork, just that shade of blue. That shade of blue is really nice. So that's a nice little bonus. All right. So I did a video a while back when I was first going through my record collection, talking about the Gordon Lightfoot records that I had, because I had so many Gordon Lightfoot records. I still do, in fact. I've not gotten rid of any of them. So I had a whole video that I could serve as a Gordon Lightfoot record collection. And I will do a proper ranking of his catalog at some point soon, too, because I think he deserves it. But there was one studio album that had been put out on vinyl anyways, because a couple of his have never been put out on vinyl. There was one that I did not own at that point. And finally, I bit the bullet and I just went on eBay and I ordered it. His last record, Gordon Lightfoot's Solo from 2020, I believe. Yes, 2020. Like, I'm going to be honest, there's not a whole lot to write home about here. These are songs that he had kind of demoed in the early 2000s before he had kind of a health scare that took him out of commission for a while. And I think they like stumbled upon these demos in a box somewhere or something. And so he re-recorded them, and this ended up being his final proper studio project. They're fine. Very late career Gordon Lightfoot to me is not especially like remarkable, unfortunately. Some of that may just be because he didn't have a whole lot to say at that point. Some of it might be that I think his performing skills just had waned pretty noticeably in his older age. So it's not like a stellar album. It's not one that I was clamoring to have on purely on merit, admittedly. But it's not a bad way to go out. And again, the completist side of me, who has all of his other records that were put out on vinyl, including many that are absolutely terrific. Yeah, I had to get that one. Okay, the next three records, I guess the last three proper records on this list, are all records that I bought after doing the Joan Baez dive. I already owned a few Joan Baez projects on vinyl, like I owned her first few records or so. I owned Diamonds and Rust. I think I owned One Day at a Time. So I own a lot of the records that I think very highly about, and as you find in the video, I rank pretty highly in that video. But the revelation, and if you haven't watched the video, like I encourage you to, and I'll try not to spoil too much here if you haven't, but the thing that jumped out at me with Joan Baez was the late career stuff, and really just how much I enjoyed that. And so I knew I needed to make a point of trying to look for her late career studio records on vinyl. And gonna be honest, kind of hard to find. Her most recent one, Whistle Down the Wind, is a little bit easier to find, because that was in like a bunch of like Barnes and Nobles and stuff like that. You still see it out in the wild somewhere, sometimes. But the record she put out before that, before kind of the vinyl craze had kicked back in. A lot harder to find. Thankfully, not as expensive as they could be, and while some of them were just never pressed on vinyl, a couple of them were, and they were actually repressed on vinyl in Britain in like 2009, 2010 or something. So not only, so they were actually given a repressing at some point, which has helped make them a little bit more affordable than what they would have been otherwise. Still not the cheapest things in the world, but I wanted to make the investment. So for instance, we have here, Play Me Backwards. This is an alternative cover as well. The original CD release of it has a completely different cover to this. Really good record. Again, as I said in the video. In fact, I think the back cover of the record, you can't see it here really, but the back cover of this vinyl pressing is the original cover of the album that was on the CD. Yeah, great record. This is her return to kind of playing with Nashville musicians at this point. And I think really that's just, I'm not going to say that's always her strong suit. Like, I'm not saying she's always at her best when she's with Nashville musicians, but a lot of the time she is. And because of that, that record really sounds like a rebirth. It's the most compelling thing she had done in almost 20 years at that point. And just really well done. Title track, one of my favorite original songs by her still. So really happy to have that. I mentioned Whistle Down the Wind. Here it is. Again, got it for pretty cheap, relatively speaking. Her last studio record, at least presumed to be her last studio record, and really just a strong note to go out on. She's in her late 70s here, but she still commands the microphone, and the arrangements that are in place here in the background really help her to kind of keep that stage presence and really serve her well. Serve her well, serve the music well. And that's really nice. So yeah, clear highlight there for late career stuff. But again, if you've seen the video, you know where this ranks. You know this is among my favorite Joan Baez records, we'll say that much. Gone from Danger, 1997. One of the hardest records to find on vinyl. Like, this is the most... This is probably the rarest Baez record in general, I think. This, again, is a repressing from the UK from, like, 2010. But even then, like, when you take into account that, like, these things do not exist in the United States ever, like, you're trying to buy them from Europe and you're paying, like, ridiculous amounts of shipping to get the record here. So that's kind of what I had to do. So this ended up being actually one of the more expensive albums I purchased in quite a while because of that. But there was no way I could pass it up. Again, just stellar. She's working with these same session musicians. It's natural. At this point, she's focusing on interpreting songs written by younger songwriters who are kind of up and coming. And that marriage is perfect. It's absolutely perfect. She continues to do it on her future records too, like Dark Chords on a Big Guitar. And I think they still work very well. I still, again, would recommend every single record she released after the 1990s pretty wholeheartedly. I think most people who enjoy my videos will probably enjoy those records. But here, I think, is the best combination of her performing skills, her singing, and the material that she selects to perform. And it really leaves you, again, it left me pretty staggered when I first heard it. Pretty remarkable achievement, and definitely, I think, one of the most underrated records in general, I think, that I've covered on this channel. We'll put it that way. But so happy to have it on vinyl. So happy to have it on vinyl. And it actually just came today. I was actually waiting on that record and the thing sitting next to me right here to actually record this video. So thank you to the fine folks at the, I think DHL or whatever, the international shipping place, because I had to buy that from Germany. Thank you to those folks for shipping that over. Okay. So this last thing that I have to show you is a box set. Now, I have talked about a bunch of the artists who I either have covered in the past, like Joan Baez, or people who I want to eventually cover in the future. But I do want to talk about the artist who I am currently working on, who I think will be the next video that I end up putting out as far as discography rankings go. Um, so I'm just going to show you this. Oh. So this is the Epoch box set by DeArmond Edison. This is a, what is it? It's like a 6 record, 4 CD box set. DeArmond Edison, if you were not aware, is a band that formed in like 2003, 2004 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And basically from that band, you see multiple different careers spawn. One is going to be the band Megafaun. They eventually will spin off from this project. The Cook brothers, Brad Cook and Phil Cook, who nowadays are very active in the Nashville scene. I just listened the other night to the Hooray for the Riff Raff album that came out last year, which one of the Cook brothers, I think it's Brad. I think Brad Cook produces that one. And Phil, I think, plays on it. So very active in the music scene now in Nashville. But the other person involved in this project, and the project for the person for whom it's named after, because there's middle names, Justin Vernon. So beating around the bush here, the next person who I do want to cover in this channel is going to be Justin Vernon. Not just looking at his work with Bon Iver, but looking at his work across all of his projects. I've already talked about a couple of his other projects already in this video. I've mentioned Gangs, I have mentioned Volcano Choir, and I even made an allusion to his work with Anais Mitchell on the album Hadestown. So it's kind of been a theme all along, and now it's just kind of come full circle here. So I'm very excited to do that video at some point, listening for that in a kind of conjunction with this 2024 revisit that I'm doing right now. As far as this Epoch box set, this came out just last year, I think. It is a collection of records that spawn not just DeArmond Edison, but also just kind of the general early years of Vernon and Megafaun. So the band that they were in before, called Mount Vernon. This includes like demo recordings. This includes one of Vernon's solo projects, Hazelton's, as well as a bunch of CDs documenting live performances. The band started out in Eau Claire. They eventually moved to Raleigh in like late 05, early 06. And they were trying to make a smash down there. They're trying to make a splash down there. And their performances, by all accounts, were like very interesting and just all over the place and phenomenal. But they were so taxing, and the band was moving in so many different directions that they could never, they were never going to last. So they eventually broke up. And of course, it was from the ashes of this breakup that Megafaun formed, as I said, but that Vernon would move back to Wisconsin and record what would become his album Forever Forever Ago under the name Bon Iver. So this is a bunch of really creative people starting to figure out their creative process, and this box set kind of documents that. It's really cool. I got it online, and the reason I pulled the trigger is because normally this is a pretty expensive box set. It costs you like $150 or something. I found it on eBay for like $80. And I wasn't entirely sure why, because they said it was in pretty good condition. And then when I opened it, I realized that the spines are like torn to shit. The records themselves, I think, are fine. The booklet, there's a huge booklet as well that comes in here, which is also part of why I got it, because I really like, that's what I value in box sets. If anything, sometimes I don't even need the music as much, because you can usually find that online somewhere. I usually value box sets for like the ancillary stuff, like the booklets and things like that, because that's where like the information lives. So it's kind of beat up, in pretty rough shape, especially for something that literally just came out last year. It looks like one of those old fucking like Chicago Carnegie Hall box sets from like 1971, where just the spines are all just run through and shot. But I digress. Anyways, I'm not even going to say that the material on that box set is like across the board stellar, but it interests me. And so I knew I needed to pull the trigger on that. I think a lot of the DeArmond Edison and early Vernon stuff is going to be interesting to talk about in the context of the video. So I look forward to eventually getting around to doing that. like I said, not sure if it'll be for sure the next one. I might do Nick Drake beforehand, but Drake and Nick Drake, not Drake himself. I'll do him eventually, but Nick Drake and Justin Vernon across the board will be probably the next two discography rankings that we do. In any case, that is the vinyl update that we've got going for you. I want to say thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope this was cool. Let me know if you have any of these records on vinyl. Let me know what some of your favorite vinyl purchases were from the year 2024. Really curious to see kind of what you all have entered into your lives, what you have let enter into your lives, and what kind of your goals are in 2025 as far as vinyl collecting and all that nonsense. So with that said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.